And thank you to Shambhala Publications. And if I may, I'm especially happy that Hazel Burkholz is here this evening. As most, if not all of you know, Shambhala Publications has been extraordinarily dedicated and devoted to publishing the work of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And even though poetry books are not known as bestsellers, they keep them in print. So I really appreciate that. And I edited the two that Kay mentioned, but the earlier book of his poetry called Mudra is also published by Shambhala, and that book is also on display and available. And then the other two, just so you know, that I edited were limited, small limited editions, and one of them is this book, which is called Royal Songs, and it has, I think 3 of the poems were previously published, but all the rest are only published here. It's very hard to get a hold of, and I happen to have a few copies, so they're also available if you would be interested. What I'd like to do is read a set of poems and then pause and take any questions or comments. A lot of you were close students of Trungpa Rinpoche and have your own experiences and may even have experiences connected with some of these poems. And so I'd be delighted if you want to share those. More horns. So we'll begin in Tibet, where Trungpa Rinpoche was born and grew up until the age of 19, and where he was given a very thorough, demanding traditional education. After he had been recognized as a tulku, a rebirth of a very important line of Buddhist teachers. And then we'll move somewhat chronologically, not entirely, but somewhat chronologically. So this first group of poems was written not in Tibet, but after he had escaped in 1959, and then in 1963 had a fellowship to come to England and study at Oxford. And so that was a period from 63 until 69, and then at early 1970 he came to North America and settled here. So here's one just about old Tibet. And one of the things that you'll notice is that his language, and not just his language, but the way he manifests in the poetry, really develops and changes over time. And the other thing that you'll notice is in the poetry, he shares himself in a personal way that is really not available anywhere else. And sometimes when he's talking about himself and his feelings, it can be a little cryptic, so I'll see if I can help. But I think that's they're wonderful poems, but the fact that he is more self-revealing in the poetry than anywhere else, I think is really significant. Silk Road. A herd of sheep roam on the meadows ornamented with turquoise flowers. The crow caws on the pine branch, conversing easily with the magpie. Flags flutter on a cairn on a red rock peak where vultures nest. From a black tent amidst dark old yak folds, smoke rises gently. And the conches and drums of invited llamas echo in the distance, irrepressibly happy and sad to see the highlands of the snowland Tibet. Traveling, listening to the whistling wind, crossing thousands of ridges, but still not seeing the end of the earth. Irritated by the gossip of the brooks, crossing thousands of rivers, but still not reaching the end of the sky. Never reaching the goal of the nomad's black tent in the distance. It is too tiring for the horses and mules. Better to pitch our tent where pasture, water, and firewood are plentiful. That may actually be two poems. And the second half, traveling, listening to the whistling wind, crossing thousands of ridges, for me, it evokes this extraordinary escape that he had to make with a party of monks and people from Surmang, his monastery, over the Himalayas in the winter for many, many months. It's really a remarkable story, which he tells in his early autobiography, Born in Tibet, also published by Shambhala Publications. In Born in Tibet, the Chinese communist invasion and suppression and destruction of monasteries and teachers and monks is, of course, a key element in the story. And he talks about it there. But after that, he rarely referred to it. And he was such a forward-looking person. Obviously, it was huge and epical. And we wouldn't be here in an odd way if the Chinese hadn't invaded Tibet at that time. So there's just one poem, and it's only 4 lines long, where he does address that. And it goes like this. The red flag flies above the Potala. Potala is the Dalai Lama's large palace. The red flag flies above the Potala. The people of Tibet are drowned in an ocean of blood. A vampire army fills the mountains and plains, but self-existing dignity never wanes. Oops. One of the important themes in Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching is aloneness and the importance of being able to be alone and experience aloneness. And that's a Dharma teaching, but it also comes so much out of his own experience. He was in exile and a refugee, and arrived in India with very few resources. So those years, I think, were really critical in his development. Here's a short poem that kind of evokes what that experience was like for him. Chogyam is merely a stray dog. He wanders around the world, ocean or snow peak mountain pass. Chogyam will tread along as a stray dog without even thinking of his next meal. He will seek friendship with birds and jackals and any wild animals. And the next poem, which also talks about loneliness, but here he's remembering his root guru, Sechin Kongtrul, whom he calls here by the name Padma Trime. Completely intoxicated by you, this longing for Padma Trime, who died in Tibet. He never came out, and it's not actually known exactly what happened to him. He very likely was imprisoned and died in prison. Completely intoxicated by you, this longing for Padma Trime. There is nothing to conceal, yet hardly anything to expose. For my faith and devotion is beyond word or melody of music, a kind that no one would be able to hear or understand. It is beautiful to grow with this loneliness, since it is your aloneness which inspires and drives me into selfless action. The echo of your voice is heard. The expression of your face is seen. When I become acquainted with these, there is no more longing, but the infinite compassion is inherited by your Son. You thrust upon me this weight. I know it will remain as burden until I see your face in me and hear your voice from everywhere. This is you, Padma Trime, ornamented with yogi costumes, dancing on a cloud, singing in the language of Dakinis. You are the fire and water. You act as the earth and the space which accommodate the infinite. At this point, he's in his 20s. After his time at Oxford, he began to do some teaching and was sponsored by the London Buddhist Society, and then was asked to teach at a Dharma center, a Buddhist center that had been created in an old hunting lodge in Scotland, in southern Scotland, in the area called Eskdale Muir. And he then became the abbot there and presided and taught there for a number of years. During that time, there was tension that developed between Trungpa Rinpoche and, I think, maybe folks in the London Buddhist Society who were very conservative, and the trustees of it was called Johnston House. And I think part of that was that as Trungpa Rinpoche realized the enormity of his mission and his challenge, he began manifesting in ways that were more provocative and more outrageous and uncomfortable for people, at least the more conservative folks who had been sponsoring him. So this is, I think, a very important poem that reflects what was going on at that time and how he was feeling about it. Whistling grasses of the Esk Valley. So the Esk is a river that flows through that part of Scotland. Whistling grasses of the Esk Valley, so many incidents occur. The image is the climate of this part of the country. There comes a hailstorm. Children seek protection. A mighty thunderbolt strikes to the ground. It does not make any distinction between trustees and the spiritual leader. Violent winds shake the Scots pine tree, copper beech, and rhododendrons. I said to myself, you, most mighty of all, should have come 3 weeks earlier. Here is the big storm. Buckets of rain pour down. The Esk River turns reddish in color, sweeps all the trees and branches away. A mighty force invades our valley. Fishes thrown up on the banks for the birds' delight. Chogyam watches all this, wishing that I could be one of those fishes, that this ruthless political current would throw me away. Why wasn't I born an innocent fish that could die in peace on the banks of the Esk? If karma exists, the weather will adjust. I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking peace, as one of those fish peacefully dead on the bank, its body a feast of its victory. But I cannot help thinking they will say grace before the meal and will have a good cook to make their evening feast enjoyable. Maybe I'll pause there. And there was one more that I wanted to read while he's still in Scotland. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I have to switch books. So this poem has some similar themes, but it develops in a very different way. It's called In the North of the Sky, and it was written less than a month after the poem that I just read. And all of this is in late 1969, when he already has decided to leave the United Kingdom and come to North America. In the north of the sky, there is a great and dark cloud just about to release a hailstorm. Mind, children, mind, young puppies and kittens, that your heads are not injured. Yet these hailstorms are merely pellets of ice. There were hundreds of magicians who tried to prevent storm and hail. In the course of time, all the ritual hats, altars, and ritual garments have been blown away by the force of the hailstorms. Here comes Chogyam, disguised as a hailstorm. No one can confront him. It is too proud to say Chogyam is invincible, but it is true to say he cannot be defeated. Chogyam is a tiger with whiskers and confident smile. This is not a poem of pride, nor of self-glorification, but he is what he is. He escaped from the jaw of the lion. Clear away, says the commander. You are standing on no man's land. We do not want to shoot innocent people. We cannot alter the path of the shell. Once the bomb is released, it knows its duty. It has to descend. Chogyam knows the course of his action. He would be described as a skillful pilot. He can travel faster than sound, faster than thoughts. He is like a sharp bamboo dagger that can exterminate pterodactyls or fast-moving boa constrictors. I am not interested in playing games. But what is a game? It is a game when you shoot pheasants and deer. You might say this is the game of the politicians, rather like the game of mahjong or that of chess. Devoid of these games, I will sail straight through like a ship sailing through icebergs. No one can change Chogyam's course, his great odyssey. The world waits, squirrels in the forest and those of the moon listening in silence amidst gently moving clouds. There is a force of silence with energy which can never be interrupted. With conviction and energy, I send my love to you. I love you. And so the kind of changes of mood, and we'll see more of this as we go on, are very typical. And some of it is a kind of bravado or confidence building, and then he kind of makes a little fun of himself with the pterodactyls and the boa constrictors. But then it has that beautiful, quiet, very sincere ending. The world waits. And I think he's referring to, he says, no one can change Chogyam's course, his great odyssey. The world waits, squirrels in the forest and those of the moon listening in silence amidst gently moving clouds. There is a force of silence with energy which can never be interrupted. With conviction and energy, I send my love to you. I love you. Okay, let me pause there, and then we'll pick up after he is in North America. Any questions or comments? Yes. They're on the counter at the back, so as you leave, they're available. And if they run out of copies, they'll take your information and send you a copy. I'm mostly reading from Timely Rain, which is the later collection. But right now I'm reading several poems from First Thought, Best Thought. Jane, do we have a mic? Okay, yes, Jane. So Jane is asking about the line which says, oops, it's in the, I read that from the other book, okay. If karma exists, the weather will adjust. I think was it, right? If karma exists, the weather will adjust. Anyone want to say something about that? Remember, we're we're in a climate of hailstorms, okay, and of danger and great challenge. But if karma exists, the weather will adjust. That's fine. We'll hear more about the, Jane said, the quality of indestructible. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Samya Ling. The monastery was Samya Ling, I should have mentioned that, which is still there and active. The Esk is the river that runs right through the property there. And that's the kind of the subject of the poem. But he does refer to the trustees, and those would be the trustees of it's Johnston House was the name of the place which became Samya Ling. It's between Eskdale Muir and Lockerbie, which you might know from that notorious plane crash that happened in Lockerbie, Scotland, so very close to there. But he was there at an earlier time. Yeah. In recent years, it turns out, and we hadn't known this, that one of his relatives, right, who is, how is he related? He's a half-brother, right? Nephew, right, nephew, yeah. For years had been collecting writings of Trungpa Rinpoche, and the Nalanda Translation Committee has been translating them, and some of them have been published. They tend to be more traditional. Of course, they were written in Tibetan, but they also are quite powerful and revealing about some of his earlier experiences. Yeah. All right, let's come now to, this is May 1972, so he's been in North America for almost exactly 2 years. And you'll notice in this poem both the change in style and how much he has picked up about American culture. And his inquisitiveness and curiosity and his ability to retain all kinds of seemingly random bits of information was extraordinary. And you'll see some of that in this poem, as well as his sense of humor and satire. American good intentions. So violent in achieving nonviolence, a journey to the moon and the discovery of Kundalini, spiritual testimonials and presidential promises, 1972. Law and order and militant monasticism, colorful gurus on sale at the A&P, Buddhologists, Rosicrucians, Masons, Zen profundity, benevolent protective order of elks, electricity by the megawatts, potential children discover potential parents, Virginia aristocrats, New York Jews, Mississippi is a meaningless noun, Idaho with its potatoes, Cape Kennedy with its moon, Washington, D.C. with its clean cut, Washington, D.C. with its clean cut, Chicago with its notorious mafiosi, Telegraph Avenue sells Himalayan art in Berkeley, Canadian internationalism, a cheap copy of the U.S.'s, a franchised Ugandan dictator, black, yellow, crimson, purple, all are primitive jokes, white cons black into gray, war is an opportune time to create peace, nationwide respectability fails to include street-trained dogs, oath of allegiance violates a sense of humor, yellow cabs roar through skyscraper canyons, urban jackals patrol the streets crying red, white, and blue, officials entertaining foreign dignitaries are busy apologizing for the presence of radical demonstrators. You kind of had to be there, but a lot of us were. And then it ends, wide as American inspiration, profound as American patriotism, protector of the free world, praiseworthy, questionable. Dignity is the object. God save America, our karmic sweet home. So in writing poems in English, which had started in England and Scotland, and then in North America, almost all of his poetry was in English. And he didn't actually write it. He composed it spontaneously on the tongue, and then there was always somebody to take it down. And he would compose without hesitation. You know, maybe there would be a gap just at the beginning while he kind of located the first thought, the starting place. But then it would come out, and sometimes faster than I could actually, almost faster than I could keep up. But there were a few times when he decided to compose in Tibetan and then translate it. And here's one of those poems. It's called RMDC, Route 1, Livermore. RMDC, Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, which is now known as Shambhala Mountain Center. And I don't think it's Route 1 anymore, but often Rinpoche would use the address of wherever he was composing the poem as part of the title, so the sense of place was very important. RMDC, Route 1, Livermore. So this was composed in Tibetan and then translated the same day. He translated it, and then I kind of helped put it into regular and metrical English. In the blue sky with no clouds, the sun of unchanging mind essence arises. In the jungle of pine trees, swayed by winds, the birds of chattering thoughts abide. Among the boulders of immovable dignity, the insects of subconscious scheming roam. In the meditation hall, many practice dhyana, meditation, giving birth to realization free of hope and fear. Through devotion to the only Father Guru, the place of Dharma has been founded, abundant with spiritual and temporal powers. Dead or alive, I have no regrets. And that was the line that I chose for tonight's event. Dead or alive, I have no regrets. Timely Rain, which is the title of this collection. Timely rain. In the jungles of flaming ego, may there be cool iceberg of bodhicitta. On the racetrack of bureaucracy, may there be the walk of the elephant. May the sumptuous castle of arrogance be destroyed by Vajra confidence. In the garden of gentle sanity, may you be bombarded by coconuts of wakefulness. That was a poem he wrote for one of his close students, and that was another thing, as many of you know, he often did what's called occasional poetry. He would write a poem for a certain event, for a marriage or a birthday or something like that. We'll hear some more of those as we go on. Haiku. So already in India, he was exposed to Japanese culture and Japanese poetry. And he loved the haiku form, the three-line form. And he would use it himself, but he also would, when there was a group of students present, all of a sudden he would say, okay, let's write some haiku. And usually he would begin, but then everybody in the room had to spontaneously compose a haiku. How many of you were submitted to that experience? And we actually have those all somewhere in the archives. But anyhow, these are all his haiku. And he said that in haiku, it's three lines, and as you may know, there are a lot of threefold things in Buddhism, such as ground, path, fruition, or what's the one that ends with action? Thank you. View, meditation, and action. And one of the things he taught us was what he called threefold logic. And in the case of haiku, he said the first line is a basic statement. The second line is kind of extending that first statement. And the third line then has some kind of a leap or a twist to it. So here are some of his. The beginner in meditation resembles a hunting dog having a bad dream. His parents are having tea, with his new girlfriend, like a general inspecting the troops. Skiing in a red and blue outfit, drinking cold beer with a lovely smile. I wonder if I'm one of them. I love that one. You know, here he is in Colorado, right? Skiing in a red and blue outfit, drinking cold beer with a lovely smile. I wonder if I'm one of them. Coming home from work, still he hears the phone ringing in the office. Gentle day's flower, the hummingbird competes with the stillness of the air. That one's a bit different and I think really, really beautiful. Gentle day's flower, the hummingbird competes with the stillness of the air. That's a little closer maybe to the Japanese haiku aesthetic. All right, here's one called Literal Mathematics. And it's whimsical and seemingly somewhat nonsensical, but not totally. And again, it really demonstrates how quick-witted and spontaneous he was. This is, and so, yeah, it all seems kind of arbitrary, but I want you to notice in the first line, it says zero is nothing. And halfway through the poem, zero shows up again. And at the end of the poem, zero shows up again. So it's not just random, arbitrary, okay? There's some first thought that he's building on. Zero is nothing. One is bold. Two is loneliness. Three is the other. Four is the peacemaker. Five is a group. Six is the parliament. Seven is a happy conclusion. Eight is security. Nine is trooping. 10 is convenient. 11 is agitation. 12 is helpless. 13 is a threat. 14 is a land speculator. 15 is a market researcher. 16 is the desperate. 17 is a troubleshooter for the ecologist. 18 is a silk merchant. 19 is a junior executive. 20 is sportsmanship. 21 is a Jewish banker. But zero is one in the realm of oneness. Oneness is one in the realm of zeroness. 2 is 16 in the realm of 18. 21 is glorious after the teething of the 3. 16 is 5, nobody knows who they are. 7 is 10 in the realm of coins. 9 is 19 because of sharp corners. 3 is 8, you have chosen a bad tailor. 4 is 14, the grammar school is inadequate. 20 is 18, need for equitation lesson. 11 is 15, bad Christmas gift. 12 is 17, a carrot is not a radish. 13 is 13, odd man out. Glory be to the 6, good table manners. Jam jar, honey pot, lemon sherbet, who's kidding whom? Kids are kite, kites fly, kids stumble in the glorious desert mole hole. Life as it was. Could life be? I mean, that way? Do you really? But zero is what? Well, zero is. Glory be to those who have missed airplane connections. Fly united. Oh yeah, always. And it, some of it are kind of plucked from his life and his experiences, and others, God knows where they came from. um, um, so there's a lot, especially as it develops, there's a lot of humor and satire, and sometimes critique of people, especially his students, but also, as we'll see, some very tender and loving poems. Here's one that's more in the satirical direction, but it's a marvelous poem. It's called Dying Laughing. It is ironic that the pigeon got run over by a car. It is sad that the MCP people got insulted. MCP? Well, you old-timers should know what that is. We're in the 70s here. The age of feminism. It is ironic that the pigeon got run over by a car. It is sad that the MCP people got insulted. What's wrong with you is that you talk too much, or for that matter, think. Yesterday was a glorious day. Today is reasonable, but a bit chilly. Boomslangs never made friends with man, but boa constrictors swallowed a church and assumed its shape. Joshua Zim appreciates highlights, or for that matter, deep throat. Flip a coin. Take a chance. What is the worth of all these thoughts? A mustache is not worth it if there is no mustacher. On the whole, it's a gigantic black hole where things come and go in and out, sometimes cheap, sometimes extravagant. The world is a big mind which reacts to all conclusions. Scattered thoughts are the best you can do. Let the mercury jump on a drummer's drum, breaking and gathering. What's wrong with you is you think too much. Talk. So don't talk or think. Or not talk first, then don't think. Or don't think first, then talk. But finally, we find non-talker, thinker, non-thinker, talker. Let's forget about it all. Om Shanti. Shh. But don't, ... Do it all anyway. Let's do it completely, that the whole universe could be exasperated and die laughing. There's a lot in this poem. Boomslangs was kind of poisonous snake in Africa, and I actually contributed that word because I had spent 2 years in Kenya in the Peace Corps right out of college. But boa constrictors swallowed a church and assumed its shape, which I think is probably a reference to The Little Prince, which was one of Rinpoche's favorite books. Joshua Zim was an early close student who unfortunately died young, but he was the founder of what started as the Vajradhatu Sun and then became the Shambhala Sun and is now Trungpa Rinpoche was the founder, but he was the founding editor of what now is the Lion's Roar. And then these really remarkable lines. On the whole, it's a gigantic black hole where things come and go in and out, sometimes cheap, sometimes extravagant. The world is a big mind which reacts to all conclusions. Scattered thoughts are the best you can do. Let the mercury jump on a drummer's drum, breaking and gathering. Extraordinary image. And I don't know if that's something that he saw in his childhood in Tibet, but you get the image of mercury, how it breaks into little bubbles and then joins together again. I've always marveled at that image. And these were the things that would just come to him. And then he immediately changes gear. What's wrong with you is you think too much. Talk, so don't talk or think or not talk first. And it sounds like nonsense, but you can actually follow it, and there is some meaning in that. Don't think first, then talk. I think that's is perhaps good advice. Shall I pause again? Any questions, comments? Yes. There was always a scribe. He was just sitting and composing out loud. I was his private secretary, so I was the scribe for many of the poems. But other people were also, especially when he was traveling or at different times. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes he would compose a poem in the middle of a big talk or a big event. So there was absolutely no self-consciousness about it, But he was, apart from the fact that he was such an extraordinary Dharma teacher, he was an extraordinary artist. And he was an artist in many different media, as many of you know. And his gift for language was absolutely amazing. This is a language that he hadn't even heard until he was 19 or 20 years old, and didn't really hear until he was 23 or 24. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of mm-hmm. Yes. Uh-huh. Okay. Good. Nice. Yeah.
I don't know if you could say anything about if you noticed a rhythm to when you would compose, like you could be doing anything and just spontaneously like that's describe or like would you plan time or just kind of like.
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, he would, at the end of a long day in which he would see people for 10-minute interviews, and then he might be giving teachings or doing meetings with his board of directors, or sometimes going out to visit with people. And he generally kept late hours. So by the time he finished his day, it was toward midnight, and sometimes even past midnight. I would be totally exhausted and wanting nothing more than to say goodnight and leave. Or actually, in the beginning, I was his driver also, so I would have to drive him from the office up to his home and kind of put him to bed. And finally, I would get to go home. Anyhow, I would be exhausted and just wanting it to be over, and he would say, "David, let's write a poem." And so I would pull out a pad, and he would start composing. and it was rare that he only composed one poem. There were usually at least two or three. And as I said, he would compose them, dictate them really without hesitation. And then when he was done, he would say to me, are there any problems? And what he meant by that was he wanted his, this was true with his teachings, but also with his poetry, he wanted it to be in good English. And being able to speak one's language well was very important to him. It's something he talked about. And so what he meant was, is there any bad English or bad grammar or anything like that in it? And this was always very challenging to me because the way in which he used the English language was so creative and so extraordinary and so unique. And I didn't want to lose any of that. So, if there were obvious grammatical problems, I would say, well, there's a little problem here, and we would straighten that out. Or actually more often, if I said, well, there's a little problem here, instead of making a correction to it, he would start composing more lines. And so there would be another 2 or 3 lines at that place in the poem. And then he would ask me to read it aloud. And sometimes we were alone, but often there were close students at the end of the day who were in the office. And so then I would read the poem. He never read his own poetry, even in Tibetan, but he never read his own poetry in English once he had composed it. And so that was often my role. And there were times when we did poetry readings. There's wonderful photographs of poetry reading at Naropa with Allen Ginsberg and maybe Anne Waldman and Rinpoche, and then me, because I was reading his poetry. There was another time in New York, NYU, there was a reading with Allen and William Burroughs and Rinpoche, and I was on the end to read Rinpoche's poetry, and Burroughs, who I never could make a lot of sense out of, but I was kind of trying to listen, and Rinpoche leaned over to me and said, "Don't listen to him." By which I think he meant just focus on being present and being ready to read his poetry. So. And after that, we had a nice Moroccan dinner at the apartment of Patti Smith. Okay, shall I go on? I don't want to keep you too long, and it's warm. It's warm in here, isn't it? I'm warm in here. So here's a poem for a student whom he was with at the time. And I love this one because it is so tender and appreciative about this particular person. Other poems were sometimes not so tender. It's called 1135 10th Street. That was the place where we happened to be. How nice it is to meet an old friend. How refreshing to see an old friend. Meeting an old friend is much better than discovering new ones. Passing an old stone on the winding mountain road. Passing an old oak tree in the English country garden. Passing a derelict castle on the French hillside. passing an old aunt on the sidewalk. Glory be to Giovannina. Maybe all this is a castle in the air. Maybe this is my conceptualized, preconceived, subconscious, imaginary expectation. Maybe this is just a simple blade of grass. It is all very touching. Maybe it is just glue, glorified glue that glues heaven and earth together, glue that seals great cracks in the Tower of London. However, there is something nice about Giovannina. When she smiles, she cheers up the depressed pollution. When she talks, she proclaims the wisdom of precision. She is somewhat small, but dynamite. She seems to know who she is. She could create thunderstorm. She could produce gentle rain. She could get you good property. She was a real estate agent. She could get you good property. She brings down the castle in the air. She is somehow, in my opinion, well manufactured. Fresh air of the Alps. I think she is fresh air, which turns into a well-cared-for garden, free from lawn mowers and insecticides. Here's a poem that he wrote to the Vajrayogin, who was the student that he designated as his Dharma successor, his Dharma heir. And for many years this was not known, and then at a certain point in 1976 he announced it. And this poem was written in early 1976, before it was made known that Narayana was his name that he was known by at that time, and his actual name was Thomas Frederick Rich. But this poem was addressed to him before he had been proclaimed and empowered as the Vajrayogin. And here you'll see there's a mix of affection and a bit of critique as well. It's called the Alden. The Alden was the name of a hotel on Central Park West where the regent was staying, and Rinpoche was staying nearby in a private apartment. This was during the time of His Holiness Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche's first visit to the United States. And there was a lot going on. The Alden and Thomas Frederick. I hand you my power. If I grow, you grow. Your childishness is the ground where you can take part in the power. Your inquisitiveness is magnificent. There is a need for a further growing tie with heaven and earth. I have given you the space, the very blue sky. The clouds and the suns and the moons are yours. But you are confused. You like more toys. Should they be made of gold or plastic? Should they come from New Jersey, which is where he came from? Should they come from New Jersey or from the collections of the British court? Could you use your responsibility as a golden joke or a Vajra scepter? It is very heavy, but I think you can hold it. Canoeing is not for you, maybe parachuting. Embroidering is not for you, maybe executing. You, my son, take your Swiss army knife, make a samurai sword out of it. He actually also wrote a commentary. He sometimes wrote commentaries, which were also poems on the poem that he had written. And it is longer. It goes line by line. But these wonderful lines where he says, I have given you the space, the very blue sky, the clouds and the suns and the moons are yours. And in the commentary, he says, well, of course I didn't give them to you because they were there for you all along, but I pretended to give them to you. Which also is a kind of teaching. So so here's a poem, and again, this is in the year 1976, which was a really pivotal year. It was the year that he empowered the Vajraregent as his Dharma heir and began turning over a lot of the administration of what at that time was Vajradhatu and Nalanda to the regent, and toward the end of that year, he received the first of the Shambhala root texts. And his energy really shifted toward the Shambhala teachings. And the following year, he was in retreat almost the entire year, and he was focusing on Shambhala and its culture and symbolism and art. And so this was a very important and significant time in his career. And here's a poem where he's reflecting on himself. And it's helpful to remember when he was just wanting to be a fish dying on the banks of the Esk, in those poems of great loneliness. This is called Aurora 7, number 1. There was a number 2 as well. Aurora 7 was a house at the corner of Aurora Avenue and 7th Street on the hill in Boulder. And Aurora 7 was the name of the space capsule in which Scott Carpenter, who was a native son of Boulder, went into space. But not only that, Scott Carpenter grew up in this house. And so it's really interesting kind of history and coincidence. So it's called Aurora 7. There's Scott Carpenter Park on Arapahoe as you drive out. Glorious year for my work. Glorious diamond for my business. Glorious gurus visited me. What could go wrong, Chuggy? Chuggy was, Diana, his wife, referred to him affectionately as Chuggy for Chogyam. What could go wrong, Chuggy? Worlds of yes and no have their place in their Christian original sin, but my world is not that. My world of nowness, where tortoises can fly, birds can swim. For the first time in my life, this is final. It is the beginning. I never began my life before. I struggled with tutor, policemen, disciplinarians with long faces, deep frowns, accusing of being a naughty boy, right and left. This was his training as a child in Tibet, which was quite harsh. Disciplinarians with long faces, deep frowns, accusing of being a naughty boy, right and left. Now the significant tutor friend I have in this city of Boulder is the sheriffdom, who are actually very obedient. American democracy is falling apart. 1976. American democracy is falling apart. The officialdom of democracy are embarrassed. In the realm of ceremonies and empowerments, there is victory chatter. There is personal pride. There is a significant proclamation. Chogyam was born as a peasant's kid, but he is willing to die as the universal monarch. And he was literally born as a peasant's kid in a poor family in a very remote part of Tibet. And here's a poem to his son, Ursel, later the Sawang, and now the Sakyong, Mipam. This was for Ursel's 16th birthday in 1979. To my son, be fearless and consume the ocean. Take a sword and slay neurosis. Climb the mountains of dignity and subjugate arrogance. Look up and down and be decent. When you learn to cry and laugh at the same time with a gentle heart, all my belongings are yours, including your father. Happy birthday. This one is called Love's Fool. Love. What is love? What is love? Love is a fading memory. Love is piercingly present. Love is full of charm. Love is hideously in the way. Explosion of love makes you feel ecstatic. Explosion of love makes you feel suicidal. Love brings goodliness and godliness. Love brings celestial vision. Love creates the unity of heaven and earth. Love tears apart heaven and earth. Is love sympathy? Is love gentleness? Is love possessiveness? Is love sexuality? Is love friendship? Who knows? Maybe the rock knows, sitting diligently on earth, not flinching from cold snowstorms or baking heat. Oh, rock, how much I love you. You are the only lovable one. Would you let me grow a little flower of love on you? If you don't mind, maybe I could grow a pine tree on you. If you are so generous, maybe I could build a house on you. If you are fantastically generous, maybe I could eat you up or move you to my landscape garden. It is nice to be friends with a rock. Okay, just 3 more. This poem is called Offbeat, and this one is special to me because it was written for me and about me in some respects. This was at the end of one of those long days, also in that year, 1976. We were still in the old office at 1111 Pearl Street, what's now the Boulder bookstore. And then after that, Karmazon moved to where it is now. And anyhow, it was late, we were alone. He was at his desk, and he started composing a poem, didn't say anything about it. He wasn't looking at me. And it, and so at one point, which is when I realized that it had something to do with me, he uses my initials, D-I-R. And it's a really lovely poem, and it was often used in wedding ceremonies. This poem would be read, and then instead of my initials, the initials of the bride and the groom would be substituted in this place. But it's very tender, and he was, especially in the early years with me, he was very tender, which I needed. My father had died very young, and I was a fragile sort of neurotic young man, and he really became like a second father. In the clear atmosphere, a dot occurred. Passion tinged that dot vermilion red, shaded with depression pink. That was an indication that, which I didn't understand at the time, that the poem might have something to do with me. Passion tinged that dot vermilion red, shaded with depression pink. How beautiful to be in the realm of non-existence. When you dissolve, the dot dissolves. When you open up, clear space opens. Let us dissolve in the realm of passion, which is feared by the theologians and lawmakers. Pluck, 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 pluck the wild flower. It is not so much of orgasm, but it is a simple gesture to realize fresh mountain air that includes the innocence of a wild flower. Come, come, DIR, you could join us. The freshness is not a threat, not a burden. It is a most affectionate gesture that a city could dissolve in love of the wildness of country flowers. No duty, no sacrifice, no trap. The world is full of trustworthy openness. Let us celebrate in the cool joy, the turquoise blue, morning dew, sunny laughter, humid home. Images of love are so good and brilliant. And here's a poem that comes back to the theme of loneliness. It so happened at this particular time that all of the really closest people in his life were elsewhere. And so he writes this poem, and it's a poem of loneliness, but also of transmutation. And I think it's very revealing in terms of how Trungpa Rinpoche worked with the phenomenal world, with relationships, with the challenges of life. It's called I Miss You So Much. I miss the Regent, and that transforms into clarity, the luminosity which perpetually lights itself. No need for switch or kindling wood. I miss my son, and that transforms into energy, unyielding energy and play which can perform the cosmic dance. I miss my queen, and that transforms into the power of speech, utterance of genuineness and nowness which cuts thoughts and proclaims the vision of indestructibility. I miss the princess consort, and that transforms into passion. Every moment becomes co-emergent twist. It is beyond coming or going. The pain of the delight lights up the universe. Choicelessly I remain as flaming Vajra. All right, and then the last one, all of the old-timers will recognize. This was perhaps Rinpoche's own favorite poem, and he called for it to be read on many occasions. And it's a fascinating poem. It came about because of a certain person who was in the administration at that time, and he was let go, which was very unusual, actually, but something happened, and Rinpoche decided that he shouldn't be in a leadership role anymore. But the whole poem is, he is envisioning himself as a general, as a commander of an army. And that's, and again, it's just fascinating how, there's this very specific event that happened that was seemingly not a very large event, but then it triggers this extraordinary imagination and imagery. It's called Victory Chatter. As an old soldier watching the territory, flags go up and down where the soldiers gather, hearing distant archery contests, horses are unsaddled in the meadow, flute of a soldier who is in love, listening to the creaking of the cannon swayed in the wind. The sound of the flute fades away. The banner of victory is fluttered by the breeze. Rustling of armor takes place constantly. Occasional smell of horse dung, occasional cheerful chatter of the armed forces. I bide in the tent, the general, listening to the occasional grasshopper's leap. How grateful to be a soldier. Ah, storm rises, gold-black cloud in the southern quarter. I can hear the flag fluttered violently by the wind. A thought occurs to me. Somebody's getting out of the administration. And another, the memory of a whistling arrow on the battlefield and the high-pitched echo of swift swordsmanship. A thought occurs to me. Somebody's getting into business. As the horses begin to neigh, they are ready for tomorrow's battle. Somebody's going to teach philosophy tomorrow and get out of the administration at the end of the week. The cloud from the south moves close to the center of the sky, dark with wrath. We hear resounding deep thunder. The warrior's fight must go on. Vigor and bravery, sharp sword, well cared for bows and rustling armor are our only resources. Frontier warfare is sad and happy. It is romantic and treacherous. Oh, how I feel that I am a good soldier, a good general, listening to the rustling of armor where the white tents are blown by the wind. We are sharpening our swords and our arrowheads. How romantic to be fighters, conquering the American plains. Good luck to Boulder, Rock, the Rocky Mountains, the pine trees, full of fantastic battlegrounds. The kingdom rests at 11 and 11. That's 1111 Pearl Street. The kingdom rests at 11 and 11. It is good to fight. It is good to know that victory is. It is good that I alone can wage this particular warfare. Sharpened sword, arrowheads, I fight in the old fashion. Thank you.